On a sunny Tuesday morning in Atlanta, Georgia, James Thompson was doing what millions of Americans do every week: grocery shopping at his local supermarket. At 34 years old, James was a successful software engineer who had recently moved to the area for a better job opportunity. His shopping cart contained the usual items: fresh vegetables, some fruit, and ingredients for the week's meals. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as James carefully checked his shopping list on his phone. He had always been methodical about his shopping, preferring to go aisle by aisle to ensure he didn't miss anything. The store wasn't particularly crowded that morning, which was exactly why he chose to shop during these hours. A few elderly couples shuffled through the aisles, and some parents with young children were doing their weekly shopping. As James reached for a box of cereal in aisle 3, he first noticed the woman. Karen Mitchell, though he didn't know her name at the time, was standing at the end of the aisle, staring at him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. She was in her early 50s, wearing expensive-looking clothes and clutching her designer purse tightly to her chest. James thought nothing of it initially and continued his shopping, moving to the next aisle. But something felt off. Every time he looked up, he caught glimpses of the same woman, always a few feet behind him. At first, James tried to convince himself he was being paranoid. After all, many people followed similar paths through the grocery store. Yet with each passing minute, the situation became more apparent. She was definitely following him. James could hear her muttering under her breath. Though he couldn't make out everything she was saying, the few words that reached his ears made his stomach turn. They were racial slurs, spoken just loudly enough for him to hear, but quiet enough that other shoppers remained oblivious to what was happening. Taking a deep breath, James remembered what his father had always taught him about handling difficult situations. "Keep your head high and your mind clear," his father's words echoed in his thoughts. He continued shopping, though his hands trembled slightly as he reached for items on his list. The store's security cameras silently recorded everything that was about to unfold. Later, these recordings would become crucial evidence, but at that moment, they were simply passive observers to the building tension. Several other shoppers began to notice the strange behavior. An elderly man with a kind face gave James a sympathetic look, while a young mother quickly guided her children to a different aisle. The atmosphere in the store grew thick with tension, like the air before a storm. James pulled out his phone and quietly began recording, keeping the device low and partially hidden by his shopping cart. He had learned from previous experiences and news stories that documentation could be vital in situations like this. His hands were steady now, focused on the task of protecting himself legally. Karen's mutterings grew progressively louder. Other shoppers could now clearly hear her racist remarks, and several looked on in shock. A young store employee stocking shelves nearby froze, unsure of how to handle the situation. The boy couldn't have been more than 19, and his wide eyes darted between James and Karen, silently pleading for someone to take control of the situation. James remained calm on the outside, though his heart was racing. He had dealt with racism before, but never so blatantly in a public space. He continued pushing his cart, pretending to check his shopping list while ensuring his phone was still recording. The produce section was just ahead, and he could see other shoppers watching the scene unfold. The store's speakers crackled with mundane announcements about sales and specials, creating an almost surreal backdrop to the tense situation. The smell of fresh bread from the bakery wafted through the air, a pleasant aroma that seemed strangely out of place given the circumstances. What happened next would soon become viral content across social media platforms, but at that moment, James had no idea how this ordinary shopping trip would change his life. He reached the produce section, and as he stopped to select some apples, Karen Mitchell made her move. The security cameras focused their unblinking eyes on the scene, ready to capture every moment of what would become a defining incident in both their lives. Little did either of them know that this confrontation would not only change their personal lives, but would also spark a broader conversation about racism in everyday America, leading to consequences neither could have anticipated on that ordinary Tuesday morning. As James stood selecting apples in the produce section, Karen Mitchell finally made her move. She marched up to his shopping cart, her designer heels clicking aggressively against the store's tile floor. Without warning, she thrust her hand into his cart, rummaging through his groceries. "I saw you stealing. I know what you people are like," Karen shouted, her voice echoing through the store. Her face was red with anger, and her perfectly styled blonde hair seemed to quiver with each accusation. Other shoppers stopped in their tracks, frozen in disbelief at the scene unfolding before them. James, still recording on his phone, took a step back. "Ma'am, I haven't stolen anything. Every item in my cart, I plan to pay for," he responded calmly, though his heart was pounding in his chest. The phone in his hand captured every word, every gesture of the unfolding drama. Several other customers had now gathered around, many pulling out their own phones to record the incident. A young woman in scrubs shook her head in disgust at Karen's behavior, while an elderly man stepped closer to James, as if offering silent support. "Someone call security," Karen demanded, her voice growing shriller. "Check his pockets. Check his cart. I saw him slip something under his jacket." She was practically screaming now, pointing her manicured finger at James while clutching her expensive purse even tighter. The young store employee who had been stocking shelves earlier rushed to get his manager. Meanwhile, other workers gathered nearby, uncertain how to handle the situation. The store's security cameras continued their silent recording of the scene from multiple angles. James maintained his composure, though inside he felt a mix of anger, hurt, and frustration. He remembered similar incidents from his past. The time he was followed around a department store, the suspicious glances at high-end restaurants, the way some people clutched their bags tighter when he passed by. But this was different. This time he had evidence. "Ma'am," James spoke firmly but politely, "I'm recording this interaction. You're harassing me based on my race, and that's illegal. I suggest you stop now." His voice was steady, professional, the same voice he used in corporate meetings at his software engineering job. Karen's response was to become even more agitated. She began knocking items out of his cart, sending oranges rolling across the floor. "How dare you accuse me of racism? I'm just trying to protect this store. I know what I saw." The store manager, a middle-aged man named Tom Davis, finally arrived on the scene. He took in the situation quickly: the scattered groceries, the recording phones, the angry woman, and the calm man being accused. Security cameras caught his concerned expression as he approached. "What seems to be the problem here?" Tom asked, positioning himself between James and Karen. His name tag gleamed under the fluorescent lights as he tried to take control of the situation. Before James could speak, Karen launched into a tirade of accusations, each one more outlandish than the last. She claimed she had seen James stealing, despite having no evidence. Her words were laced with racial stereotypes and prejudice, each statement digging her deeper into trouble as phones continued recording. The store's regular background music played softly overhead, creating an almost surreal soundtrack to the scene. The smell of spilled oranges mixed with the regular store aromas as more customers gathered to witness the confrontation. James calmly turned to the manager. "Sir, I have the entire interaction recorded. This woman has been following me through your store, making racist remarks, and now she's falsely accusing me of theft. I'd like to file a formal complaint." Tom nodded, having already assessed the situation. He had worked in retail for 20 years and had seen his share of confrontations, but this was different. The clear prejudice, the recordings, the witnesses, he knew this would require immediate action. Karen, realizing that the situation wasn't going her way, suddenly changed tactics. Her face shifted from anger to fear as she noticed the number of phones pointed in her direction. She began backing away, her designer heels stumbling slightly on the smooth floor. "This isn't over," she threatened, her voice slightly shaking. "I'm calling the police." She reached for her phone, her hands trembling as she dialed, unaware that her actions were only making the situation worse for herself. The automatic doors at the front of the store swooshed open and closed as curious customers entered, immediately sensing the tension in the air. No one could have predicted how the next few minutes would unfold, or how this grocery store confrontation would soon capture national attention. While Karen frantically dialed the police, the situation in the grocery store continued to intensify. Store manager Tom Davis had already radioed for all available staff to come to the produce section, knowing this situation needed careful handling. The store's cameras whirred quietly, following every movement of the unfolding scene. Yes, I'm at Walker's supermarket," Karen spoke into her phone, her voice trembling with theatrical fear. "There's a threatening man here, and I need help immediately." She deliberately left out crucial details about her own behavior, twisting the narrative to paint herself as the victim. James, still maintaining his remarkable composure, turned to Tom and spoke clearly enough for his phone to record. "Sir, I'd like to show you my receipt from my last visit here. I shop at this store every week." He pulled up the digital receipt on his phone, demonstrating his regular customer status. The crowd of onlookers had grown larger. Among them was Sarah Chen, a local news reporter who had just stopped in for a quick lunch break. She immediately recognized the journalistic significance of what was unfolding and began taking detailed notes on her phone. Karen's attempts to create chaos weren't finished. In a sudden move that shocked everyone, she lunged toward James's cart again, this time grabbing his personal backpack from the child's seat area. "What's in here? This is probably full of stolen goods," she screamed, trying to unzip it. Several gasps echoed through the crowd. Tom quickly stepped forward, his face stern. "Ma'am, you need to put that down immediately. You have no right to touch another customer's belongings." James's backpack contained his work laptop and important documents. His heart raced as he watched Karen manhandle his property, but he remained steady. "Please put my bag down. That's my work property, and you're now attempting to steal my belongings," he stated firmly, making sure his phone captured everything. Two more store employees, Maria Rodriguez and Kevin Park, arrived to help control the situation. They positioned themselves strategically around Karen, creating a subtle barrier between her and James. The fluorescent lights overhead cast harsh shadows on everyone's faces, highlighting the tension in the air. "The police are on their way," Karen announced triumphantly, still clutching James's backpack. "They'll sort this out." She seemed oblivious to how the situation had spiraled far beyond her initial accusations. A young mother in the crowd suddenly spoke up. "I've been watching this whole time. This woman has been harassing this man for no reason." Others began nodding in agreement, and more voices joined in support of James. The store's automatic sprinklers activated in the produce section, creating a light mist over the vegetables. The unexpected shower seemed to momentarily break the tension as people stepped back to avoid getting wet. Karen, distracted by the sprinklers, loosened her grip on James's backpack. Quick thinking, Maria seized this opportunity to carefully retrieve the backpack from Karen's hands, smoothly passing it back to James. "Sir, I believe this belongs to you," she said professionally, shooting a disapproving look at Karen. The sound of police sirens could now be heard in the distance. Karen's face showed a mix of emotions: anger, fear, and something that looked almost like realization. The gravity of her actions seemed to be slowly dawning on her. Tom, the store manager, had been quietly reviewing the security footage on his tablet. "Officers will be here soon," he announced to everyone. "I have clear footage of everything that has happened in the store today." His words caused Karen to pale visibly. James checked his backpack to ensure nothing was damaged. His laptop was safe, but the encounter had left him shaken despite his outward calm. The morning's simple shopping trip had turned into something that would likely change both his life and Karen's forever. The automatic doors at the store's entrance slid open, and two police officers walked in. Officer Johnson and Officer Martinez moved purposefully through the store, following the crowd's noise to the produce section. The fluorescent lights glinted off their badges as they approached. Karen's demeanor changed instantly at the sight of law enforcement. She straightened her designer blouse and tried to compose herself, but the dozens of phones recording her previous behavior had already captured the truth. The evidence was overwhelming, and there would be no twisting this story. The officers surveyed the scene: the scattered produce, the crowd of witnesses with phones raised, the composed man with evidence of harassment, and the woman who had caused it all. What happened next would become a viral moment viewed by millions across the globe. Officers Johnson and Martinez quickly assessed the scene in the produce section of Walker's supermarket. The morning's fluorescent lights illuminated a tableau of scattered fruits, dozens of recording phones, and a crowd of concerned onlookers surrounding James Thompson and Karen Mitchell. "What seems to be the situation here?" Officer Johnson asked, her voice carrying the calm authority of a 15-year police veteran. Before anyone could answer, Karen rushed forward, tears suddenly streaming down her face. "Officers, I'm so glad you're here. This man," Karen began, but Officer Martinez raised his hand, cutting her off. "Ma'am, please step back. We need to hear from everyone involved, and we'll start with the store manager." Tom Davis stepped forward, tablet in hand. "Officers, we have the entire incident recorded on our security cameras." This woman has been following and harassing this gentleman throughout the store, making racist remarks and falsely accusing him of theft. She also attempted to take his personal property. James quietly handed his phone to Officer Johnson. "I have video evidence of the harassment, officer." It began in aisle 3 and continued until now. His voice remained steady, professional, and composed. Sarah Chen, the news reporter who had witnessed everything, approached the officers and introduced herself. "I've been here since this began. Multiple witnesses can confirm this woman's unprovoked harassment, and I have detailed notes of the timeline." Karen's face transformed from fake tears to anger. "You're all against me. I was just trying to protect this store. I demand to speak to your supervisor." She shouted at the officers, her designer purse swinging wildly as she gestured. Officer Martinez turned to the crowd. "Did anyone here witness this gentleman stealing anything?" The response was immediate and unanimous, heads shaking no, and several voices speaking up about Karen's behavior instead. "She's the only one who caused trouble here," an elderly man said firmly. This young man showed remarkable patience while being harassed. Officer Johnson reviewed the footage on James's phone, her expression growing more serious with each passing moment. The video clearly captured Karen's racial slurs, her aggressive behavior, and her attempt to take James's backpack. "Ma'am," Officer Johnson addressed Karen, "based on the evidence we're seeing, you've committed several offenses here today. We need you to remain calm and cooperate with us." Karen's demeanor shifted again, this time to panic. She looked around wildly, perhaps finally realizing the severity of her actions. The store's background music seemed to mock the tension as it played cheerful shopping tunes. "This is ridiculous. I want to speak to your supervisor. I know the police chief." Karen's voice had risen to a shrill pitch. Several customers winced at her volume. Officer Martinez spoke into his radio, requesting additional units. The situation was under control, but protocol required backup when dealing with an uncooperative subject. James stood quietly, watching the scene unfold. The morning's shopping list remained uncompleted in his phone, a mundane reminder of how ordinary this day should have been. Store employee Maria brought him a bottle of water, a small gesture of support that didn't go unnoticed by the watching crowd. Tom Davis approached the officers with more evidence. "We've compiled all the security footage from every angle. It clearly shows the entire incident, including when she followed him through multiple aisles before the confrontation." Karen's face had lost its color as she watched the officers review the footage. Her previous confidence had evaporated, replaced by the dawning realization that her actions were being taken seriously by law enforcement. "Sir," Officer Johnson turned to James, "would you like to press charges? Based on the evidence, we're seeing multiple offenses including harassment, attempted theft, and potential hate crime charges." The store fell silent, waiting for James's response. The produce section sprinklers had created small puddles on the floor, reflecting the fluorescent lights like tiny mirrors. Even Karen stood still, her designer heels no longer clicking on the tile floor. James looked at Karen, then at the officers. His response would set in motion a chain of events that would extend far beyond this grocery store confrontation. The weight of the moment wasn't lost on anyone present, as they waited to hear what this man, who had maintained his dignity throughout such blatant harassment, would decide to do. The automatic doors swooshed open in the distance as additional police units arrived, their presence adding to the gravity of the situation. What James said next would not only affect his own future, but would become part of a larger conversation about racism, accountability, and justice in everyday America. James Thompson took a deep breath, looking directly at Officer Johnson. "Yes, I would like to press charges," he said firmly. "This kind of behavior needs to stop, and there must be consequences." The moment James finished speaking, Karen's composure completely shattered. "You can't do this to me. Do you know who I am? I'm the regional director at Maxwell Corporation." Her voice echoed through the store, drawing even more attention from curious onlookers. Officer Martinez pulled out his notepad. "Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As he began reading Karen her rights, she backed away, bumping into a display of oranges. "This is ridiculous. I'm leaving," Karen suddenly announced, turning on her heels and making a dash toward the store's exit. The crowd gasped as she pushed past several customers, her designer purse swinging wildly. Officer Johnson immediately radioed the units outside. Suspect attempting to flee through the main entrance. Female, mid-50s, wearing blue blazer and white pants. Her voice was calm but authoritative as she followed Karen at a steady pace. What Karen didn't expect was the quick thinking of the store's customers. As she reached the parking lot, she found her escape route blocked by several shopping carts, strategically placed by concerned citizens who had witnessed her behavior. "My car! Let me get to my car!" she screamed, her perfectly styled hair now disheveled as she tried to push past the makeshift barrier. Her white Mercedes was just yards away, but the path was completely blocked. Meanwhile, inside the store, James was providing his statement to Officer Martinez. Sarah Chen, the news reporter, had already begun conducting brief interviews with witnesses, her journalistic instincts taking over. She followed him for at least 20 minutes, one elderly witness reported. "I watched the whole thing. The young man never did anything wrong." Outside, Karen's attempted escape had come to an inglorious end. Officer Johnson and the backup units had caught up with her near her car. Her designer clothes were now slightly wrinkled, her makeup smeared from sweat and tears. "Karen Mitchell, you're under arrest for harassment, attempted theft, and disorderly conduct," Officer Johnson announced, carefully handcuffing Karen as other officers looked on. Additional charges may be added after review of the evidence. The parking lot had become a second stage for the morning's drama. Customers watched from behind the store's large windows as Karen was led to a police car, her protests now reduced to quiet sobs. Her white Mercedes would remain in the parking lot, a lonely reminder of how quickly life can change. Back inside, Tom Davis approached James with a cart of fresh groceries. "Sir, please accept these groceries with our compliments. We want you to know that this kind of behavior is not tolerated in our store." James was touched by the gesture but politely declined. "Thank you, but I'd rather pay for my groceries. I just want to be treated like any other customer." His response earned nods of respect from those nearby. Sarah Chen approached James carefully. "Mr. Thompson, would you be willing to share your story? People need to hear about this." She held out her business card, understanding the significance of what had transpired. As the morning's events began to wind down, store employees worked to restore order to the produce section. The scattered fruits were collected, floors were mopped, and the regular rhythm of shopping slowly resumed. Officer Martinez finished taking statements and approached James one last time. "We'll need you to come to the station later to complete some paperwork. Here's my card with the case number." The automatic doors continued their steady rhythm of opening and closing as curious customers came and went. Some had captured the entire incident on their phones, and already, social media was beginning to buzz with clips of Karen's meltdown and attempted escape. What no one realized at that moment was how this incident would explode across the internet in the coming hours. Karen's position as a regional director at Maxwell Corporation would add another layer to the story, and her attempted escape would become a viral video seen by millions. As James finally headed toward the checkout with his groceries, he couldn't help but think about how a simple shopping trip had turned into something much bigger, something that might actually create change. By late afternoon, the morning's grocery store incident had exploded across social media platforms. Video clips of Karen Mitchell's racist tirade and attempted escape flooded Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. The hashtag grocery store Karen was trending nationwide, alongside hashtag Justice for James. "Mr. Thompson, you handled this situation with remarkable composure," Detective Brown commented as she organized the paperwork. "We're also investigating this as a potential hate crime based on the language she used." Meanwhile, across town at Maxwell Corporation's regional office, an emergency board meeting was in progress. The company's CEO had flown in specifically to address the situation. Karen Mitchell's face was plastered across every major news outlet, and the company's phones were ringing nonstop. "This is a PR nightmare," the CEO announced to the board members. "We've already received thousands of emails demanding action. Our company values clearly state zero tolerance for discrimination of any kind." Back at the police station, James received an unexpected visit from civil rights attorney Marcus Rodriguez. "Mr. Thompson, I saw the videos online. What happened to you today is unfortunately all too common, but you have a unique opportunity here to make a real difference." James listened carefully as Rodriguez explained the potential for both criminal and civil cases. The evidence was overwhelming, with multiple camera angles, witness statements, and Karen's own recorded admissions of her corporate position during her tirade. By early evening, Maxwell Corporation released their official statement. "We are aware of the incident involving our regional director, Karen Mitchell. Effective immediately, Ms. Mitchell has been suspended pending a full investigation. Maxwell Corporation stands firmly against racism and discrimination in any form." Local news stations camped outside the police station, waiting for any updates. Sarah Chen, who had witnessed the original incident, was now leading the coverage for her network. Sources say Ms. Mitchell is facing multiple charges, including harassment, attempted theft, and potential hate crime enhancements, she reported live. Social media continued to churn with updates. Someone had found Karen's LinkedIn profile, revealing her 20-year career in corporate leadership. Professional connections were quickly distancing themselves, and her previously impressive network was crumbling in real time. James's phone buzzed constantly with messages of support from friends, family, and even strangers who had seen the videos. His sister, a civil rights activist in Chicago, had already booked a flight to come support him. At the courthouse, Karen was processed and released on bail by early evening. She emerged wearing sunglasses, hiding behind her lawyer as reporters shouted questions. Her designer outfit from the morning was wrinkled, her carefully maintained image completely shattered. "My client has no comment at this time," her lawyer announced to the press. "We ask for privacy as we address these allegations." They quickly ducked into a waiting car, but not before cameras captured Karen's disheveled appearance. Back at his apartment, James sat with attorney Rodriguez, reviewing their next steps. "The criminal case is just one aspect," Rodriguez explained. "We have a strong civil case for harassment and discrimination. Maxwell Corporation could also be held liable as her employer." On the coffee table, James's phone continued to light up with notifications. National news networks were requesting interviews, civil rights organizations were reaching out with support, and #JusticeForJames had become the top trending topic nationwide. "I never wanted to be the center of attention," James told Rodriguez, "but if this can help prevent someone else from experiencing what I did, then it's worth it." Outside James' apartment complex, a small group of supporters had gathered with signs reading "Stand Against Racism" and "We Support James." Local community leaders were organizing a larger rally for the weekend. As night fell, the story continued to grow. International news outlets picked up the story, and the video of Karen's attempted escape through the parking lot had been viewed millions of times. What started as a simple grocery store trip had become a national conversation about racism, privilege, and accountability. James looked out his window at the supportive crowd below, thinking about how different his date had turned out from what he planned. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, interviews, legal meetings, and difficult decisions. But for now, he took comfort in knowing that his composed response to hatred had sparked an important dialogue. The incident would prove to be a turning point, not just for James and Karen, but for how society addressed everyday racism. The repercussions were just beginning to unfold. 1 week after the grocery store incident, Karen Mitchell sat in her lawyer's office, facing the harsh reality of her actions. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Dozens of witness statements, multiple videos, and security footage that captured every moment of her racist behavior. Karen's appearance had changed dramatically in just a week. Her designer clothes were replaced with a simple black suit, her perfectly styled hair now pulled back plainly. The confident corporate executive was gone, replaced by someone who finally seemed to understand the gravity of her actions. "Maxwell Corporation has officially terminated your employment," Stern continued, sliding the notification across his desk. "They're also distancing themselves from the incident and have offered to cooperate fully with any investigation." Tears welled up in Karen's eyes as she read the termination letter. Her 20-year career, gone in an instant. Her professional reputation, destroyed by her own actions. The reality of her situation was finally sinking in. Meanwhile, across town, James Thompson was meeting with civil rights organizations. His calm response to racism had sparked a movement, and he was determined to use this platform responsibly. "We're not just filing a lawsuit," James explained to the group. "We're pushing for mandatory anti-racism training in corporate environments. This isn't about revenge, it's about creating real change. The district attorney's office had decided to pursue hate crime charges along with the original complaints. Assistant DA Sarah Martinez held a press conference announcing their decision. The evidence clearly shows this was a racially motivated incident, Martinez stated to the assembled reporters. Our office takes these crimes seriously, and we will prosecute them to the full extent of the law. Back in her lawyer's office, Karen was presented with two options. We can fight this in court, Stern explained. But with the evidence against you, I strongly recommend considering a plea deal. The plea deal included several conditions: mandatory sensitivity training, community service hours, significant fines, and a public apology. It would help her avoid jail time but required her to take full responsibility for her actions. After hours of discussion with her lawyer, Karen made her decision. The next day, she appeared at a press conference, looking nothing like the angry woman from the viral videos. I want to apologize to Mr. Thompson and to everyone who witnessed my inexcusable behavior. Karen read from her prepared statement, her voice shaking. My actions were racist, wrong, and caused tremendous harm. I am deeply ashamed and am committed to changing. Social media exploded with reactions to her apology. Some praised her for taking responsibility, while others remained skeptical of her sincerity. The hashtag Karen apology began trending alongside ongoing discussions about racism in America. James watched the press conference from his lawyer's office. His response was measured and thoughtful, as it had been throughout the ordeal. I accept her apology, he stated to reporters afterward, but words must be followed by actions. Real change requires more than just saying sorry. The plea deal was finalized the following day. Karen would serve 200 hours of community service, attend mandatory anti-racism training, pay substantial fines, and remain on probation for 2 years. Maxwell Corporation used the incident to launch a comprehensive anti-racism training program across all their locations. Other companies followed suit, recognizing the need to address systemic racism in corporate environments. Local community leaders organized forums to discuss racial bias and its impact. The grocery store incident had become a catalyst for broader conversations about racism in everyday life. Karen's first day of community service was at a local community center. Gone were the designer clothes and superior attitude. She worked silently, cleaning and organizing, watched by curious volunteers who recognized her from the news. James had declined multiple offers for interviews from major networks, choosing instead to work with local organizations focused on fighting racism. His calm response to hatred had made him an unexpected role model. Sometimes the biggest changes start in the smallest places, he told a group of high school students during a speaking engagement. Like a grocery store on an ordinary Tuesday morning. As the legal proceedings concluded, both James and Karen's lives had changed forever, but in very different ways. One had found a platform for positive change, while the other faced the consequences of letting hate overcome humanity. The incident would be remembered not just for the viral videos, but for the conversations it started and the changes it inspired in corporate policies and public awareness of everyday racism. 6 months after the grocery store incident, James Thompson stood at a podium in front of a packed auditorium at the National Conference on Racial Equality. What happened to me that morning could have ended differently. James began his keynote speech. I could have responded with anger, but that would have only fed into stereotypes. Instead, we turned it into a movement for change. In the audience sat Karen Mitchell, quietly taking notes. As part of her journey to make amends, she had been attending similar conferences and workshops. The transformation in her appearance and demeanor was striking. Gone was all pretense of superiority, replaced by genuine humility. James's phone app, Record and Report, had just launched that morning. Developed with his software engineering background, it provided a safe way for people to document and report incidents of racism. The app had already been downloaded thousands of times. Change doesn't always come from big moments, James continued. Sometimes it comes from standing your ground with dignity in a grocery store, recording evidence of wrongdoing, and letting justice take its course. Walker's Supermarket, where the incident occurred, had become a model for other businesses. They had implemented comprehensive anti-bias training and installed clear signage about their zero-tolerance policy for discrimination. Their initiative was being studied by retail chains nationwide. After completing her community service, Karen had started working with anti-racism organizations, sharing her story as a cautionary tale. "I became the very thing I never thought I was," she would tell groups. "But hitting rock bottom opened my eyes to my own prejudices." James's civil lawsuit against Maxwell Corporation had been settled out of court. The company agreed to establish a substantial fund for racial equality initiatives and implement mandatory anti-bias training across all their locations. Other corporations followed suit, recognizing the need for systemic change. The grocery store video had become a teaching tool in corporate training sessions and school discussions about racism. James's composed response was studied as an example of how to handle discrimination while protecting oneself legally. "6 months ago, I was just a software engineer buying groceries," James told the audience. "Today, we've helped create new corporate policies, developed resources for victims of racism, and started important conversations in communities across the country." Sarah Chen, the reporter who witnessed the original incident, had produced an award-winning documentary about the impact of everyday racism. Both James and Karen were featured, showing how a single incident could lead to transformation, both personal and societal. In the back of the auditorium, James's family watched proudly. His father, who had taught him to keep his head high and his mind clear, wiped away tears as his son received a standing ovation. Karen approached James after his speech, maintaining a respectful distance. "Thank you," she said simply, "for helping me become a better person." James nodded, acknowledging her words but maintaining professional boundaries. The incident had sparked changes beyond their local community. State legislators were now considering bills requiring anti-bias training in workplaces. Social media companies had improved their policies for handling videos of racial incidents. James's Record and Report app had expanded to include resources for legal help, counseling, and community support. It was being translated into multiple languages, reaching communities worldwide. "This isn't the end of the story," James concluded his speech. "It's just the beginning. Every person who stands up to racism with dignity, who records injustice, who demands change, they're all part of this continuing journey." As the audience rose in applause, James looked out at the sea of faces. He saw people of all backgrounds united in the cause of fighting racism. The grocery store incident had become more than just another viral video. It had become a catalyst for real change. Outside the conference center, a group of young activists waited to meet James. They wore T-shirts with the slogan, "Dignity Against Discrimination," inspired by his response to Karen's racism. The story of James Thompson and Karen Mitchell had evolved from a viral moment into a movement. It showed how one person's composed response to hatred could inspire positive change, and how another's journey from prejudice to awareness could teach valuable lessons. As James left the conference that evening, he passed the local Walker's supermarket. Through the windows, he could see their new anti-discrimination posters clearly displayed. He smiled, knowing that sometimes the biggest changes start in the smallest places, like a grocery store on an ordinary Tuesday morning.